Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So, I'm just wondering, is there a Latin term for pulling an argument out of your ass?
Hey everyone, I wanted to talk about some men's rights issues today and why I think a lot of them are misrepresented by MRAs. So one of the issues I feel is being misrepresented is prostate cancer. They'll often compare the attention that breast cancer gets and suggest that it's sexism against men that leads to the less attention given to prostate cancer. There's actually a reason that makes a lot of sense that has nothing to do with sexism. For starters, breast cancer affects men and women, so that's why it's false just for the first reason.
Okay, we'll have a look at some stats in a couple of minutes and we'll see exactly how many men it affects as opposed to how many women. But basically, it is predominantly a female disease. It affects vastly more women than it does men. Now, that's not to say that we should exclude those men, of course not. We should also, acknowledge that they can get breast cancer. But obviously, there's a very good reason why when people talk about breast cancer, it is predominantly focused on females. Now, the ranting feminist here, or Claudia Brown as she's known now, may disagree with that, in which case I assume she would have a major issue with all the organisations which are raising money for breast cancer awareness and doing research into breast cancer, because the vast majority of them focus almost exclusively on female victims. And once again, this makes sense to me, but if Claudia's argument is going to hold water here, then she should be arguing for more gender-neutral advertising campaigns. Right, Claudia? Next.
Secondly, the fatality of breast cancer is a lot worse than prostate cancer.
Well, it's good to see she's backed up her argument with a lot of statistics here. She hasn't. Oh well, not to worry, because we'll be looking at those statistics in just a moment. But first, she's got an incredibly bad argument to make.
Prostate cancer can, of course, be fatal as well, but it is a lot less likely to be just because of where it's located. It isn't good, and I highly encourage men to get their prostate checked once they're over the age of 40 with their doctor, but I also think that we need to think about this logically without the MRA ideological lens. Where is your prostate located? To put it very bluntly, in your arse. Where is breast cancer found? The breasts. What's around the breast area? The lungs, the heart, and all your essential organs. Of course, your ass is essential too, but it's a lot less likely to kill you if something goes wrong with your ass compared to your chest.
Possibly one of the stupidest arguments I've heard on YouTube in the 5 years I've been making these videos. She literally has pulled this argument from her ass with absolutely no statistics or evidence to back it up. Just the assumption that because prostate cancer, in her words, is in your ass, it is somehow less deadly than breast cancer. Now, the interesting thing about this is I've heard Claudia, on more than one occasion, claim that MRAs never back up their arguments with stats or any type of evidence. Which is strange, because I've been doing that longer than she's been making YouTube videos. So let's do the work for her, right? Because she obviously hasn't looked at the stats and the figures before coming to this incredibly stupid conclusion. So let's compare breast cancer to prostate cancer using some stats from here in Australia, considering both Claudia and myself are Australian. But I think you'll find that these stats are pretty comparable right across the Western world at least. So this material is from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. They are government stats, and these are the predictions for 2018 based on previous years. So the number of new cases of breast cancer predicted to be diagnosed in 2018 is 148 males and 18,087 females. Now, as I said earlier, this is something which affects females vastly more than males, which is why it's considered a female disease. Once again, We shouldn't ignore the male victims, but it's perfectly understandable that the focus is on females. So the total number of people diagnosed with breast cancer, predicted to be diagnosed with breast cancer in 2018, is 18,235. So the estimated number of new cases of prostate cancer in 2018 is 17,729 males. That means there will be an estimated 506 more new cases of breast cancer than prostate cancer. So it's pretty close. Like I said, these two things are very, very comparable. So the next stat we should look at is the estimated percentage of all new cancer cases diagnosed in 2018. It's 13.2% for breast cancer, and the estimated number of all new male cancer cases diagnosed in 2018 is 23.8%. Now, you'll note here that for prostate cancer, it is just showing us the figure for all new male cancers. So to get a rough comparison, if we take into account that males are 50% of the population, and we half the figure, we get 11.9, which once again is quite comparable to the breast cancer figure, especially when you take into account that more males get cancer. So once again, these two figures very, very close. So now let's look at the important thing, which is how many people die from breast cancer and prostate cancer. Now, according to Claudia, because prostate cancer is in your ass, it is far less deadly. So we should expect the number of males dying from prostate cancer to be far lower than people dying from breast cancer, right? Considering, as she said, that the breasts are near the heart and lungs. Therefore, it's obviously far more deadly, right, Claudia? I seriously hope she's not a medical student. But anyway, let's look at the numbers. So the estimated number of deaths from breast cancer in 2018 is 28 males and 3,128 females. Once again, predominantly women. So the total number is 3,157. So we should be expecting the male deaths from prostate cancer to be far, far lower because it's just something in your ass. Unfortunately for Claudia, the number of estimated deaths from prostate cancer in 2018 is 3,500. Now, last time I checked, 3,500 is a higher number than 3,157. Yep. Maybe you should have looked at some statistics, Claudia, before pulling an argument from your ass. But once again, these numbers are fairly close. So there's a couple of more stats we should look at. Estimated percentage of all deaths from cancer in 2018, 6.5% for breast cancer. Estimated percentage of all male deaths from cancer in 2018, 12.7% for prostate cancer. Now, once again, this is only dealing in male deaths. Now, because males are 50% of the population, we should half that, which gives us around 6.3. Now, it's going to be slightly higher than that because, as I said earlier, there are more males with cancer than females. But the figures are very, very close once again. Now, the last stat here is chances of surviving at least 5 years. For breast cancer is 90%. Now, this is important because Claudia talks about this in a moment. So for breast cancer, it's 90%. For prostate cancer, it's 95%. Once again, very, very close. Now, these are estimates for 2018, so in case you're wondering about 2017, new cases, breast cancer amongst females, 17,586. Prostate cancer amongst males, 16,665. Once again, pretty close. As for deaths, prostate cancer in 2017, 3,452. Breast cancer amongst females, 3,087. Once again, more deaths from prostate cancer. Even if you factor in the small percentage of males, prostate cancer is still a bigger killer, despite it being in your ass, Claudia. So these two cancers are very, very similar and very comparable when you look at the statistics, which Claudia obviously hasn't done. That is, except in one particular area where there is a massive difference, and that is the area of funding. When it comes to research and funding for prevention, you will find that breast cancer gets 3 to 4 times the amount of funding, despite these two cancers being statistically so similar, and prostate cancer actually being a bigger killer. And that is the issue we have, Claudia. The issue is the inappropriate levels of funding. Now, I'm guessing if prostate cancer got 3 to 4 times the funding that breast cancer did, there would be a massive feminist outrage. They'd be screaming that this is proof that women are second-class citizens, and this is proof that we live in a patriarchy where women are oppressed by men, etc., 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 right? We would be told that female lives are less valuable. But of course, when the opposite is true, when breast cancer gets 3 to 4 times the funding that prostate cancer gets, we get videos like this one from Claudia making excuses and defending it. Not to mention, once again, pulling an argument right out of her fucking ass.
Chest is a lot more likely to produce a fatal result when something goes wrong. So it isn't that breast cancer is more important as such, just that people are more likely to have known someone to die of it because of statistical likelihood.
Statistical likelihood, even though you're more likely to die from prostate cancer. And, you know, they're quite comparable when it comes to the stats. Apparently, according to the stats, which Claudia hasn't looked at, people are more likely to know someone who's died of breast cancer. Interesting. But to be fair, Claudia does show some information on the screen as she's talking. So let's have a closer look at this, because there's some really interesting stuff here. So the first thing that she pops up is a blurb saying the 5-year survival rate tells you what percentage of men live at least 5 years after the cancer is found. And it's got here the 5-year survival rate for most men with local or regional prostate cancer is almost 100%. Yes, well, as we just saw, it's actually 95%, which I guess you could say is almost 100%. But what Claudia doesn't tell us is the survival rate of breast cancer. If you're going to make a claim that prostate cancer is somehow vastly more survivable, and you show stats supporting that, then you should also show the stats for breast cancer so there is a comparison, which strangely she doesn't do. But as we just saw, breast cancer, the survivability for 5 years is 90%, which is very close to prostate cancer. What a shame she left that bit out. I'm sure it's just an oversight. And then she flashes up a screenshot of a webpage which says, what do prostate cancer patients die of? And she's highlighted a bit that says, prostate cancer patients have a higher risk for dying from various causes other than prostate cancer. So I tracked down this particular article and had a look at it. Now, the bit that she left out, strangely, she mustn't have read this far, I'm guessing, is the first line of the introduction says, approximately half of the men who receive a diagnosis of prostate cancer die from prostate cancer itself. Did you miss that bit, Claudia? And it basically goes on to say that the number of deaths due to prostate cancer are declining due to improved testing and treatment. And because of this, fewer patients are dying from prostate cancer, whereas other conditions are playing a greater role. But for some reason, you missed that first line in the introduction, Claudia. I'm guessing you just didn't read that far, right? You've just done a Google search and you've just come up with the very first thing you've come across, which supports your dismissal of prostate cancer being as serious as it is. And unfortunately, that's all Claudia is doing in this video. She's trying to dismiss men's rights issues any way she can, even though she claims to be a supporter of men's issues. I seriously have my doubts. I suspect her main motivation is defending the ideology of feminism. Now, if you disagree with me, wait until you see the rest of her video. It doesn't get any better. Speaking of things not getting any better, there is a third screenshot we should look at from Claudia's video. So she flashed up on the screen. All survival rates are increasing, however. We can see that survival of prostate cancer in 5 years is up to 95% from 60%. Yes, but once again, you don't mention that the survival rate for breast cancer is 90%. You just left that bit out for some reason. Much of the reason prostate cancer will turn fatal is if it goes undiagnosed. Interestingly, black men are significantly more likely to die of prostate cancer than white men are. Now, this is the bit at the end that really pisses me off. Funny, I never see MRAs bring that up. Now, this really pisses me off because I've been dealing with this shit for the last 2 months in my response videos to Thomas Smith, who really likes to play the race card even though he's got no evidence to support it. And it seems that Claudia is doing the same here, right? Why not just make a subtle allegation that MRAs only care about white men? Right, Claudia? Because when we say that funding should be increased for research into prostate cancer, that's only going to benefit white men, isn't it, Claudia? If they find a cure for prostate cancer, it's only going to affect white men, right? This is just fucking laughable. As I've been saying so often in my response videos to Thomas Smith, when MRAs say men, they mean all men. They are inclusive of black men and gay men and short men and tall men and bald men, trans men and men with green eyes and men who like soccer and every other type of men. Even feminist men, believe it or not. Now, admittedly, when we're advocating for more funding and awareness about prostate cancer, I guess we would be exclusive of trans men because they don't have prostates, but we are inclusive of trans women who do have prostates. You see how that works, Claudia? We don't need to go and name every single subcategory of male when we say men. But, of course, the social justice mindset says that if you're not specifically talking about men of colour or gay men or trans men or some subgroup which is acceptable in their eyes, then you must be excluding those groups and only talking about the evil straight white men. And I'm kind of sick of this argument. It's just a bigoted derailing tactic, really, and it really pisses me off. But anyway, let's continue with Claudia pulling arguments from her ass.
This is one huge issue I have with MRAs. They've gendered this issue as if it's discrimination against men to care about breast cancer, which, yes, does affect more females than males, but they ignore the reasons why this is and just assume it's because of some sexism against men. This is quite ironically exactly what people of their ideological sway tend to accuse feminists of, so I couldn't help but chuckle when thinking about the irony of them doing the exact thing that they accuse feminists of all the time.
Now, I've seen Claudia do this before. What she'll do is she'll say that she understands the men's rights perspective and what we're talking about, and then she'll dismiss it, right? When, in fact, what she's showing is she doesn't understand the arguments at all. And basically, her entire argument is just based on assumptions. Now, once again, Claudia, just to make it really fucking simple for you, because I think that's probably the best way to do this. Despite your interesting argument about prostate cancer not being as deadly because it's in your ass, there are actually more men dying from prostate cancer. Slightly more men. The two cancers are very comparable. Except when it comes to funding. That's the key issue here, Claudia. Now, maybe you can explain to me why breast cancer gets so much more funding than prostate cancer. Now that your explanation has been debunked, maybe you have another explanation. It looks like female preference to me, but by all means, give me another explanation if you can. Just don't pull it from your ass this time. And And yes, I know I'm using that joke a lot, but really, it's hard to pass up.
Another issue I see misrepresented by MRAs is male suicide. Firstly, yes, men are more likely to die by suicide than women. The thing that MRAs ignore, though, is that the very basic psychology to learn that men are more likely to choose violent methods of suicide, which are generally more effective than the non-violent methods.
Okay, but you admit that more men are actually dying, and that should be something we're talking about, right? As well as what is causing men to attempt suicide. Now, there are a variety of reasons. It's not as simplistic as just saying it's one thing and therefore that's causing the male suicide spike. There are many, many reasons. And many of those reasons tie into men's issues in a more general sense. Now, one of the things that causes a spike in male suicide is after a divorce. As I've often said in the past, when a woman gets divorced, she loses a husband, but when a man gets divorced, he often loses his entire family. Losing a wife is one thing, but losing your kids as well is devastating to many men. So it's not a surprise that there is a spike during a divorce and the whole trauma caused by the family court system. But that's something we'll get onto in a little while, isn't it, Claudia? And for the record, no one is suggesting that we can't talk about female victims of suicide or female attempts or the reasons why females attempt suicide. All we're saying is there are specific reasons that cause men to commit suicide, and often when we try to talk about those reasons, the excuse we get is that more women attempt suicide, as if that is somehow a legitimate reason to dismiss what we're trying to talk about. Not to mention that stat is actually false. But that's one of the problems we have with feminists, Claudia, is that when we try to talk about a men's issue, like male suicide, and the reasons that men are more likely to commit suicide, we just get dismissal from feminists. We get derailing tactics. We get fucking excuses.
There are theories about why this is in psychology, but I really dislike the lack of evidence behind them. There's theories that women don't want to leave an ugly corpse, but I actually see no evidence for this whatsoever, so it just seems like someone thought this was a plausible explanation rather than actual evidence or science, so I don't even think that's real psychology, it's just conjecture. We can verify that men are more likely to use violent methods based on attempts and epidemiological data that relates to this. It is very easy to count corpses involving methods of suicide like shotgun or hanging, and we can tell if someone has attempted non-violent methods of suicide with things like an overdose or something like that when they're admitted to hospital, as a lot of the time they can be. The thing with overdose is that it's a very painful way to go, but it's often very sort of romanticised in the media. It's also kind of ineffectual. So a lot of people think that overdose means that they'll just fall asleep and never wake up. What they don't realise is that very sadly, it'll most likely end up with them being horribly ill, vomiting as their body wants to purge the drug that's causing the problems, and if you do die, it will be very painful liver failure probably. There's also a lot of people who survive but have chronic conditions and need to be on medications forever because the suicide attempt, left them really damaged, which is quite tragic. I once knew a girl who overdosed on painkillers and just ended up with a horrible chronic liver problem and had to take medication for the rest of her life. So just because women tend to survive suicide attempts based on the data does not mean that they don't suffer, nor that they didn't want to actually commit suicide at the time they did this. I'd also say that a chronic liver condition is no sort of minor thing to deal with. I think that they also are suffering, and it's bullshit that MRAs constantly downplay it as long as it didn't actually end up in a death.
Okay, so let me get this straight, right? MRAs are trying to talk about men who have actually died. And when we do this, we get feminists coming in and saying, but women attempt it more. What about the women who have attempted suicide? Which is downplaying males who have died, right? It's a technique to diminish and dismiss a male issue. It is a derailing tactic. So now when we complain about that, we're accused of downplaying females who have attempted suicide. This is just fucking astounding. It really is. I'm not sure if you're just lacking self-awareness or whether you're extremely dishonest. Now, look, for the record, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't give a shit about people who have attempted suicide and failed. Yes, you are correct. Some of them do have lifelong medical conditions because of it, and obviously many of them have mental health issues or suffer depression. You know, the things that led them to the suicide attempt in the first place. All these things should be talked about and dealt with. However, they shouldn't be used as a fucking bludgeon to try to derail men's rights activists talking about males who have died. Yet that's exactly what happens every single fucking time we bring up this topic. We hear constantly, but women attempt it more, as if that somehow makes the male victims disappear, like they're totally unimportant. And once again, that the claim that women attempt it more is false. Next.
I want to also mention here that using non-violent methods of suicide does not mean that you're not serious about committing suicide at the time. I see this sentiment a lot from MRAs, which is one of many reasons I could not ever bring myself to support them. They think that all women who attempt suicide without actually dying are just attention-seeking bitches, and that is a sentiment that is frankly disgusting to me.
We think that all women who attempt suicide are attention-seeking bitches. Really? Well, that is a fascinating claim. I would love to see some evidence that we think that all women who attempt suicide are attention-seeking bitches. But of course you're not going to provide any evidence of that, are you? Now, there is an argument to be made that not all suicide attempts are serious attempts, and that some of them are in fact a cry for help. Now, just in case Claudia thinks that this is some MRA conspiracy or something, I did a little bit of research on the internet. Let's start with Stop Suicide, which is an anti-suicide webpage. And under facts and statistics, it has suicide is very often a cry for help, not a wish to die, and it can be prevented. Next, let's read a little bit from Psych Center. Frequently asked questions about suicide. Why do people attempt suicide?
People usually attempt suicide to block unbearable emotional pain, which is caused by a wide variety of problems. It is often a cry for help. A person attempting suicide is often so distressed that they are unable to see that they have other options. We can help prevent a tragedy by endeavoring to understand how they feel and helping them to look for better choices that they could make. Suicidal people often feel terribly isolated. Because of their distress, they may not think of anyone they can turn to, furthering this isolation.
So it's often a cry for help. Very interesting. Next, let's look at a paragraph from Newsweek. The article is Why Men Are Killing Themselves.
Clinical psychologist Dr. Martin Seeger, a consultant for the Central London branch of the Samaritans whose work focuses on male psychology, traces the paradox back to gender. Women are, in general, more prepared to seek help and show their distress. A female attempt is often closer to a cry for help, hoping for a response. Typically, the male is seeking a different outcome. According to Seeger, when he makes a suicide attempt, he doesn't want anyone to hear it, he wants to succeed. He compares the action to a soldier seeking an honorable death.
So that's pretty clear. He's saying that when women attempt suicide, often it is a cry for help. They don't really want to die. But when men do it, they tend to be more extreme. They tend to seek more permanent means of killing themselves. Something that you can't be saved from, like shooting yourself. Next, let's have a look at a study. Now, admittedly, this study is from 20 years ago, but it does have some interesting things to say. It's called Why Women Are Less Likely Than Men to Commit Suicide.
So, Murphy says at least 200,000 women are involved in suicide attempts annually. But he points out that attempted suicide most often is not an attempt to actually end one's life. Its purpose, he says, is to survive with changed circumstances. An attempted suicide is not really an attempt at suicide in about 95% of cases. It is a different phenomena. It's most often an effort to bring someone's attention, dramatically, to a problem that the individual feels needs to be solved. Suicide contains a solution in itself, he says. In attempted suicide, both men and women tend to use methods that allow for second thoughts or rescue. Murphy says that when people intend to survive, they choose a slowly effective, or ineffective, means such as an overdose of sleeping pills. That contrasts to the all-or-nothing means like gunshots or hanging used by actual suicides.
Now, to be perfectly honest, I find the line, an attempted suicide is not really an attempt at suicide in about 95% of cases, a little bit hard to believe. Now, I could be wrong, maybe this study is correct, but it seems a little bit high to me. But I do have another study which came out a year later, and it has a different finding, although it is still quite high. It is more believable, though. This study is called Prevalence of and Risk Factors of Lifetime Suicide Attempts in the National Comorbidity Survey. And the results we have...
Prevalences. The estimated lifetime prevalences of suicide ideation, plans, and attempts in the NCS are 13.5%, 3.9%, and 4.6%, respectively. Attempters were presented with 3 statements describing the lethality of their attempt. Of the attempters, 39.3% endorsed the statement that they made a serious attempt, and it was only because of luck that they did not die. While 13.3% endorsed the statement that they were serious, but knew the method was not foolproof. And the remaining 47.3% endorsed the statement that their attempt was a cry for help, and they did not want to die.
So that's a very interesting finding. 47.3% endorsed the statement that their attempt was a cry for help and they did not want to die. That is almost half the people who committed or attempted suicide and survived. That is an extremely high percentage. Now, obviously, all attempts should be taken very seriously. It doesn't matter if it's a cry for help or whether the person was actually intending to kill themselves with no way out, but for some reason failed. Every single attempt should be taken seriously, and anyone who attempts should get help. And even if it is a cry for help, they should not be dismissed. In fact, that cry for help should be listened to, and they should get that help, because if they don't, they might attempt a second or third time, and quite possibly they won't survive those attempts. But there is a reason why this is relevant, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. And that is, every single time an MRA brings up the fact that men have a much higher suicide rate, and we need to talk about the reasons why, we get the stock standard feminist response, which is, but more women attempt suicide. And as I said earlier, this is in fact false. No complete count is kept of suicide attempts in the US. However, the CDC gathers data each year from hospitalizations on non-fatal injuries resulting from self-harm behavior. And it also says, because of the way these data are collected, we are not able to distinguish intentional suicide attempts from non-intentional self-harm behaviours. And it goes on to say, but we know that many suicide attempts go unreported or untreated, and surveys suggest that at least 1 million people in the US each year engage in intentionally inflicted self-harm. So when someone quotes the women are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide stat to derail the conversation about male suicide, what they're actually saying is that women are 4 times more likely to self-harm and end up in the hospital. Now, we don't know what percentage of that self-harming behaviour is actual suicide attempts. We don't know how many of them are a cry for help. And we don't know how many of them are other forms of self-harm, which aren't suicide attempts at all, or a cry for help. For example, some people will use threats of suicide or fake suicide attempts as a form of emotional manipulation. Now, these stories are pretty easy to find. Basically, one person will break up with the other one, and the other one will threaten suicide or make a pretty poor attempt at it to emotionally manipulate their partner into coming back. Now, considering males are far more likely to die from suicide attempts, and as Claudia and many other feminists have pointed out, men are more likely to use lethal means of committing suicide, like guns, for example, it is perfectly reasonable to speculate that maybe women are more likely to use suicide attempts as a cry for help, whereas men are more likely to turn to suicide as a last resort, not using it as a cry for help, but using it as a means of ending their pain. Now, when I was researching this, I found a blog which had an article about this topic, and the last paragraph of this post, I think, really sums it up. Men might be more often past the stage where they want to make a cry for help, or they might not feel comfortable making a cry for help, or they might not think a cry for help will be effective. From Wikigender, greater societal stigma against male depression and a lack of social networks of support and help with depression are often identified as key reasons for men's disproportionately high level of suicides. Since suicide as a cry for help is not seen by men as an equally viable option. So, no, Claudia, we don't think that all failed attempts by females are just bitches attention-seeking. But what is a valid point to discuss when talking about suicide is the different levels of help that males and females get, or maybe I should say the different levels of help males and females perceive that they will get. And if women are more likely to use suicide as a cry for help, then I think it's safe to suggest that society is more willing to listen to that cry, or at very least females perceive society as being more likely to listen to that cry for help, whereas men don't. And you know what doesn't help change that, Claudia, just in case you're wondering? Every time we bring up the topic of male suicide, having that derailed by feminists, that really doesn't help change that perception that society really doesn't care about males and what they're going through. In fact, you might say it makes it fucking worse.
A previous video I made about this had comments from MRAs saying that this is the case for women, so I'm speaking from experience here from what I've actually heard from MRAs I've spoken to.
Actual MRAs, right? That you've actually spoken to have said that all women who attempt suicide and fail are bitches seeking attention. Well, that is an extremely interesting claim there, Claudia. I think I'll have to go and have a look at that. So she has a video called Male Suicide, published November 1st, 2016. I'm guessing this is the video she's talking about. Maybe there's another one I can't find, but I'm assuming that this is the video about male suicide that she is referring to. And you may be surprised at this. You may be shocked, but I cannot find a single comment from a men's rights activist who is claiming that all women who attempt suicide and fail are somehow bitches seeking attention. Now, like I said, maybe there's another video that I haven't seen or don't know about. Maybe she deleted those MRA comments. Maybe they don't exist. Maybe they're exaggerations. Maybe they were made by people who aren't MRAs. I mean, I guess we'll never know, will we? And Claudia does have a little bit of a history of claiming random people are MRAs when they're not. So, yeah, I don't know if I'm just going to take her word for it that these MRAs that she actually spoke to actually said these things.
I hate when MRAs downplay problems that women have instead of acknowledging that anyone can suffer, anyone can attempt suicide, and anyone can be mentally ill. This isn't something that feminists downplay or pretend doesn't exist for men, so I don't see why they are always doing it to women.
She says with a straight face in a video which is downplaying the seriousness of prostate cancer and male suicide. And she'll go on to the family court in a minute. Fucking unbelievable. Absolutely no self-awareness whatsoever. It's astounding. It really is. No, of course, Claudia. Feminists never downplay men's issues. No, it never actually happens at all, right? Like, it's not happening in this video. Now, the thing about Claudia is she claims to actually care about men's issues, but it's pretty fucking clear that her priority is her feminist ideology. And when these two things clash, the men's rights issue takes a back seat. So instead of actually investigating to see if the men's rights claim about prostate cancer getting less funding and it being a comparable type of cancer to breast cancer, instead of actually looking into that and looking at statistics, she started from the viewpoint that the MRA position is wrong. She made up an argument which she just pulled out of her ass, and then she found statistics to supposedly support that. But she didn't look at the whole picture. She just cherry-picked certain statistics and presented them in such a way as to suggest that, prostate cancer, well, it's not as bad as MRAs make out. Now, I don't think she's doing this because she doesn't care about men who suffer prostate cancer, but I do think she's doing it because she puts her feminist ideology above everything else, including reality, right? Who cares about facts and statistics and anything else when you've got feminist ideology to rely on, right? It's like a fucking religion to people like this.
But of course, they get a pass for it because they're MRAs and they're just the downtrodden, whereas us feminists are the big meanie pies. We're big meanies. So if we were to downplay men's issues, we're horrible, horrible people. But if they downplay women's issues as they do all the time, then that's just, oh, well, they're just people with a different opinion.
Okay, so I've been doing this for about 5 years now, and I've learnt something in that time. And that is, if you have feminists discussing a female issue, then at no point is anyone allowed to bring up a male issue. If anyone in any way mentions a male issue, then they're a misogynist and they hate women and they want to go back to the 1950s and force women to make sandwiches in the sandwich mines and take away the female vote. Because women need a space to discuss women-specific issues, and no one should interfere. And you know what? I'm fine with that. That's a perfectly reasonable argument to make. But here's the hypocrisy. If at any point you have a group of men talking about a men's issue, if at least 50% of that time is not dedicated to the equivalent female issue, then apparently they're misogynists who hate women and want to go back to the 1950s and force women into the sandwich mines and take away the women's vote, and they hate women everywhere. They're probably Nazis who voted for Trump, and they just hate women, and they don't really care about female victims because all they want to talk about is male victims, and they're excluding females because they're misogynists. And we don't forget that they're misogynists. We have to really mention that they're misogynists because they're not spending at least 50% of their time talking about women. The fucking misogynists. Nazi misogynists. Trump voting Nazi misogynists, white supremacists. You get the idea. This is such fucking hypocrisy. Look, if you want your own groups which talk specifically about female issues, fine, have them, but let us have the fucking same, okay? If we talk about prostate cancer and we want it to get more funding, that doesn't mean we don't think breast cancer is important. If we're talking about male suicide, people who have actually fucking died, that doesn't mean we don't care about females who have attempted suicide. But, maybe we would like a space to talk about those specific issues that have affected those men to a point where they feel they have no option but to take their lives. For fuck's sake, everything doesn't have to be about your feminism. I know that's hard for you to understand because it's like a fucking cult to people like you, but live with it.
So to go on my next statements about these things, does this mean that I don't think that men should receive any help for prostate cancer or for suicidal ideation or indeed an attempt at suicide? Absolutely and unequivocally no, this is not the case. I know that's what a lot of MRAs seem to want to believe that all feminists believe, but no, I don't really want men to suffer or go through hardships as difficult as that might be for you to get your head around.
Well, when you spend your time misrepresenting reality and presenting misleading arguments and facts in an attempt to diminish and dismiss the men's issue, which should be talked about, I can't think why we would come to that conclusion. It really is a mystery, Claudia. We must be misogynist. That must be the only explanation. Because clearly you did such a fucking fantastic job at research for this video. Astounding. It really was. I don't know what else to say.
I think that one big contributor to things like men being homeless or committing suicide is because men don't feel like they can talk about their problems or seek help. In my experiences with knowing a lot of what men go through, it seems to me like they feel like they can't share their problems without it being seen as a sign of weakness or without being mocked or ridiculed. It's because men don't feel like they can talk about their problems or seek help. In my experiences with knowing a lot of what men go through, it seems to me like they feel like they can't share their problems without it being seen as a sign of weakness or without being mocked or ridiculed. Part of my hesitance speaking about this, though, is that I'm not sure it would help as much as men leading these conversations.
This is what men's rights look like! This is what men's rights look like! This is what men's rights look like! This is what men's rights
Within feminism, I do believe we should be talking more about men's problems and show our support, but I think MRAs have largely poisoned this whole dialogue by blaming feminism for all of men's problems.
Okay, let me give you a metaphor. Now, considering the first part of this video, I talked a lot about cancer. Let's go with that. Let's say a particular person gets cancer, and this particular person lives in a country which is dominated by a particular religion. And this particular religion frowns upon modern medicine. And because of this, it makes it harder for this person with cancer to get the proper medical help that they should be getting. It either prevents them entirely from getting that help, or it makes it harder for them to get that help, or it spreads misinformation, which makes them less likely to go and get that help. Now, did the religion in question cause the cancer? The answer is no. It didn't cause the cancer. But it is preventing a cure. It is making it harder for people to get cured. So I think it would be perfectly reasonable to spend part of your time criticizing that religion. If they are actively standing in your fucking way, if they're making your job harder, then yes, they should be criticized. And guess what, Claudia? That's exactly what you're doing in this video of yours. When you spread misinformation about things like prostate cancer, when you diminish it to make it seem like it's less harmful than it is, because you've done no fucking research into it, and you're just making wild assumptions, pulling wild assumptions from your ass of all places, yes, you are part of the problem. Yes, you are standing in the way. You are acting just like the fucking religion in my metaphor. And yes, you deserve criticism. You're part of the fucking problem.
I don't think that men's problems are solely caused by feminism, and this is why I can't stand MRAs. All of their rhetoric leads to feminism did it though. They don't have any evidence to prove any of this, they just seem to think feminists cause all of the bad things, and I just can't go along with someone who thinks that I'm personally to blame for everything that has ever gone wrong in their life and the lives of all men.
Oh, she can't be serious. She can't be serious, can she? She must be a po. She must be. I know she's not, but I'm trying to convince myself that she's actually a po, because she can't be that stupid, can she? Look, I don't want to delve into ad homs, but fucking hell, that was an amazing claim. It really was. MRAs have no evidence to support that feminism is part of the problem. Well, Claudia, you're starring in episode number 60 of a series of mine which is filled with evidence. You know, actual evidence, not like the stuff that you present in your videos. And my response to Garrett's series would also be highly recommended, focusing on the positives and the negatives feminism has towards men's issues. You'll find I'm very fair in that series. I give credit to good feminists doing good work, but I definitely criticise the bad ones who are standing in our way. And unfortunately, there's more than a few of them. Of course, I'm not the only MRA that uses evidence. You will find that all the leading MRAs are more than happy to give you a long list of citations. Of course, if your only experience with MRAs is reading random comments from people who probably aren't even MRAs in your comment section, then I guess you would come to the conclusion that MRAs never use evidence or facts to back up their case. I don't know if that's a good sample size though, Claudia. I think maybe a better option would be looking at actual MRAs who actually advocate for men's rights. You may be surprised. It might take you a while to go through all the evidence, but of course you'll just deny that it exists, won't you? Because you're comfortable in your little cult.
It is bullshit to put that on me or any other individual feminist, or even feminism in general, because there's no evidence that feminism caused any of this. When it comes to custody of children, I believe a big reason for people being biased in favour of a woman taking care of the child is because of sexism against women.
And here's a nice little bit of feminist doublethink that we unfortunately hear all too often. So here's how it goes, right? If you have a situation where women are disadvantaged and men are advantaged, then we're told that this is proof that women are oppressed by the evil male patriarchy, which sees women as second-class citizens and only cares about dominating them, right? And it's clearly sexism against women. But when you point out a situation where men have the disadvantage and women have the advantage, surprisingly, that is still sexism against women. It's amazing the doublethink that they use in this case. Claudia doesn't take into account that the women going to the courts and winning custody actually want custody of their kids. They're getting what they want. Society isn't forcing them to take custody of their kids. She doesn't take into account that many fathers are prevented from seeing their kids for years or even decades. She doesn't take into account the depression this causes a lot of men. And yes, the spike in suicide. She doesn't take into account that the social expectation that men should be the breadwinners is actually sexism against men. It's actually a very restrictive gender role. Apparently none of that matters, because she has to make excuses, so women are always the disadvantaged ones. Right, Claudia?
Seeing women as better caregivers, I believe, is a sexist idea. This is part of what causes the disparity in wages, this idea that the woman must stay at home looking after the kids while the man keeps his career and works.
And you know the really, really interesting thing about that, Claudia? You know, that thing that you're totally missing here? The interesting thing about that is that there are feminist organisations which support those roles, which are actively fighting against shared custody, which clearly come out and say that they want default custody to go to women. Meanwhile, Warren Farrell, the father of the modern men's rights movement, has been talking about fathers having more options for the last 20 years. Actually, well over 20 years. He's been saying that fathers need to have options about staying home and being full-time fathers or working part-time and being part-time fathers. You know, the options that women have had for decades. You obviously didn't take any of that into consideration, though, did you, Claudia?
When a couple separates, defaulting to the woman looking after the kids is just part of this assumption that women are the caregivers who'll stay at home taking care of the children while men go out and make money. To change these court outcomes, you must tackle the issues of sexism as well as improving things like maternity leave, childcare affordability, and so on. I think a lot of feminists are reasonable people, and in every interaction I have with an MRA, I tend to be on the receiving end of something abusive or strawmanning me, and they always seem to use this justification that we feminists started it. They point to feminists who have called out MRAs for their bullshit, and they point to feminists who they believe are misandrist, and choose to ignore the words actually coming out of my mouth.
Here's the thing, Claudia, we're hearing you loud and clear. I don't think you're listening to us, though. That's pretty evident.
Are feeling like they're totally justified in treating me like shit because we started it. This is one thing that has always made it impossible for me to get on board with MRAs. The fact that they can't see me as anything but the enemy, when I would like to see some of these problems go away as well.
So you would like to see these problems go away as well. And what exactly are you doing to try to make these problems go away? Let's see. First of all, you misrepresented the number of deaths by prostate cancer in an attempt to make it seem less harmful than it is. You claim that MRAs don't really care about women who attempt suicide and fail, and you use this as a means to derail the actual conversation about men who have actually committed suicide and died. And then you claimed that women being privileged in the family court system is actually some kind of sexism against women. I gotta say, Claudia, you are doing an amazing job fighting for men's rights. It is a mystery as to why MRAs have a problem with feminism. And with feminists like you know, I guess we're really not needed, are we? That last bit was sarcasm, in case you didn't pick up on it.
The fact that I'm met with such hostility if I ever do try bothering to reach out to them just makes me not bother in general. The fact that when I talk about these issues, MRAs assume the worst of me and just get mad at me without listening to what I'm actually saying, again, makes it impossible to deal with them. So go ahead and justify being assholes to feminists because we started it, and see how it polarizes and tanks your own movement, because it alienates people like me and it alienates the hell out of a lot of people. Anyway, that's all I wanted to...
Here's the thing, Claudia. Feminists constantly lie about MRAs. They constantly use non-MRAs as examples of MRAs. You know, Roosh v. Elliot Rodger, just to name two very common ones. They misrepresent our arguments. They protest our talks. They shut down our movies. They quote mine and take things out of context. They use shaming language to try to get us to shut up about our issues. That's why we have problems with feminism. If you cut all that shit out, then, you know, you wouldn't get as much shit in return. Now, should you be held responsible for the words and actions of other feminists? The answer is no. But I will hold you responsible for your own words and your own actions, like I've done in this video. Unfortunately, though, I get the feeling that you won't listen to any of my points. If you watch this, I'm guessing you'll just double down, right? You'll continue to make excuses, and you'll continue not to listen to what we're actually saying. Now, I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I'm pretty sure, based on what I've seen from you, that your one and only goal is the defense of feminism, no matter what. It's feminism über alles, right?
No. Ugh, no way in hell. Oh, there's no one new around you.
Where have all the good men gone?
I'm guessing away from you if they're smart.
Hey, you there?
Who, me?
Yes, you. Are you a sad single woman eating a kilogram of cheese?
No. Why would you think that?
If you're a lonely lady looking for love, we at MRAharmony.com will find a perfect man for you. We have thousands of disenfranchised, passionate men's rights activists just waiting for you to love.
Human rights activists? Oh, they're so kind and giving. Where do I sign?
Well, actually, your inferior female listening skills meant you misheard me. They're just men's rights activists.
Oh, so in other words, men aren't human. Oh, I get it, yep.
Close enough. Should I start getting ready for my date?
Sure. Here at MRAharmony.com, we'll find you a great guy who is concerned about problems facing men and boys.
Now, the source they have is Men's Rights Australia, and I have to ask the question, what is wrong with being concerned about the issues faced by men and boys? Apparently that's a bad thing.
Fantastic.
We promise you'll be paired with your perfect Prince Charming, who will mistreat and objectify you because that's what you really want.
Well, what a surprise. Source, Return of Kings, that renowned MRA website, which is actually an anti-MRA website. How strange that they would use that.
You'll never have to wonder if you look fat around your new soulmate.
Great.
Because he'll definitely tell you.
Once again, the citation is Return of Kings.
We here at MRA Harmony will find you a special someone who thinks that feminism is a powerful ideology and a terrorist movement.
You know,
And once again, the source is Return of Kings. Although I have to say, in this case, Return of Kings isn't totally wrong.
this whole thing's making me kind of depressed. Don't you have any...
Depressed? Well, then try consuming semen. Here at MRA Harmony, we believe semen is a mood-enhancing drug for women, and we're committed to finding a future husband to supply semen to you.
Now, this time they actually did get a men's rights website, Men's Right Australia, yet again, and the article on Men's Right Australia is actually referring to an article on Psychology Today. So I guess Psychology Today is a part of the patriarchy, trying to oppress women or something.
So you can focus on more important things like leaving your career, preparing meals, and procreating.
So here's the lie that we often hear, that MRAs want to go back to the 1950s and chain women to the kitchen sink, right? Yeah, which actually goes against what we want, right? Because we actually want more options for men. And you're not going to get that if you go back to the 1950s. You fucking morons.
I'm starting to think that you don't know anything about women.
At MRAharmony.com, we know that brilliant relationships happen when female submission is ignited by male misogyny.
No. This is just... no.
Did you say no? At MRAharmony.com, often no means yes.
And Return of Kings yet again. What a surprise.
I don't think I want to sign up for this.
You don't? Then you're probably a whore.
How dare...
So sign up for free today at MRAharmony.com. Please, for some reason, no one will have sex with us.
And of course they have to finish off with some good old-fashioned sex shaming, right? Because the best way to belittle MRAs is to say that they're not getting laid. Which is ironic, considering they're using Return of Kings to try to debunk us.
The word free relates solely to cash tender, as personal freedoms will be strictly limited, dignity not included.
Now, I guess you could always join malefeministharmony.com and take the risk of getting sexually assaulted on the first date, right? Been plenty of examples of that lately, hasn't there?